Hey everyone, Emily from Bob's Watches here. Welcome back to another episode of Inside Watches, a series where I will share some of the lesser known watch collecting tips from the industry in the hopes of helping you build a more valuable luxury watch collection. As always, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the Bob's Watches YouTube channel to receive notifications on future videos just like this one. In this episode of Inside Watches, I will discuss the difference between acrylic and sapphire crystals. What are they, and how can you tell them apart? Well, let's find out. If you aren't already familiar, the crystal is the transparent material on top of the watch that protects the dial. I'm going to focus on the two most common types, acrylic and sapphire. You might be more familiar with sapphire. It's a newer material produced from the mineral corundum, the same mineral as the sparkling blue sapphires used in jewelry. Only the sapphire used in watchmaking is synthetic and pure, which is why it appears clear instead of blue. It's a popular material used throughout watchmaking because it's tough, seriously tough. In fact, it's the second hardest mineral in the world after diamonds and is ranked at a level 9 on the Mohs scale for overall hardness. It's more transparent than acrylic, won't scratch as easily, and it's hard to break. Turning our attention to acrylic, the transparent thermoplastic material was created nearly 2 centuries ago and is more common in vintage watches. You might also be familiar with its many other names, such as hesselite, plexiglass, perspex, and many more. Sapphire is virtually scratch resistant and very strong. So why does the industry still use acrylic when sapphire is also an option? For starters, it's lighter than sapphire. It also doesn't shatter the way sapphire does and is cheaper to replace. On the other hand, acrylic scratches easily, but it isn't too difficult to buff those scratches out, depending on how deep they are. Acrylic also doesn't glare as much as sapphire, although many watch companies treat their sapphire crystals with an anti-reflective coating to prevent this issue. If you haven't seen very many examples of both materials in person, they can be hard to distinguish from one another. Side by side, acrylic is more convex and less shiny, while sapphire is flat. Acrylic also lends a different, almost retro aesthetic to a watch. In contrast, sapphire is sleek, contemporary, and nearly flawless. It doesn't have the same distortions as acrylic. Choosing between the two comes down to personal style, and if you prefer the smooth, resilient properties of sapphire or the warmth and retro character of acrylic. We pulled a few examples of each material to give you an idea of how different they can appear in person. The earliest examples of sapphire within the Rolex catalog date as far back as the 1960s. The company spent the better part of the 1970s and 1980s slowly transitioning from acrylic to sapphire crystal. If your Rolex was produced before this era, it probably sports an acrylic crystal. If it was made during the late 1980s or early 1990s, the chances of it featuring sapphire are pretty high. As you can see here on this example of the brand new Rolex Submariner 126610LV, the sapphire crystal is flush with the rest of the case. On the other hand, the acrylic crystal on this example of the vintage Rolex Submariner 1680 sits higher than the sapphire. Another really great example of acrylic is the Speedmaster. Omega still manufactures some Speedmaster models with an acrylic crystal, aka hesselite, because it's safer for astronauts to use in space than sapphire. Hesselite tends to crack when it breaks, while sapphire shatters. As you can imagine, countless fragments of shattered sapphire crystals are not ideal in zero gravity. Which crystal do you like better, acrylic or sapphire, and why? Let us know in the comments below. Well, that's a wrap for this episode of Inside Watches. Make sure to check back soon for more watch collecting tips.